Dear friends, today we are going to tell you a story that will shock you. It's the story of a pious girl, a Hafiz-e-Quran, one who has memorized the entire Quran, who made a living by sewing clothes for people. After her death, however, she was afflicted with a terrible punishment, and the state of her grave astonished everyone because she was known to be such a virtuous girl. At the people's request, when her mother revealed the truth about her daughter, it sent shivers down everyone's spine. This is a deeply instructive story, especially for tailors and those who work in sewing and embroidery, because they might unknowingly commit a sin that could lead to severe punishment. The story is about a girl named Fatima, who lived in a remote area of the city with her mother after her father passed away. Her mother made sure Fatima memorized the Holy Quran, received a school education, and learned to sew so she could at least help with the household expenses and ensure they had enough to eat. Fatima was a very hard-working girl with firm principles she never strayed from. One day, two women approached her and repeatedly motioned for her to sew their clothes. But Fatima gave them a clear and firm refusal, stating that she could not sew their garments. The women pleaded, "Fatima, please don't refuse. You sew clothes for everyone, and you do it so well. Please sew our clothes too. We've bought very expensive fabric and don't want to ruin it by giving it to just any tailor. You know all the women in the neighborhood get their clothes stitched by you. You do such good work at a low price and the clothes look great." Fatima replied, "But the design you're asking for, I don't sew those kinds of clothes. They show the full arms and the salwar design is such that the calves and feet will be visible above the ankles. God forbid, how can I sew such clothes?" With that, Fatima flatly refused. The women tried to tempt her, saying, "We'll pay you more money. We love your stitching. You work with such finesse." Fatima stood up and said, "No, sister, I will not do it," and walked toward her kitchen. Fatima's mother apologized to the two women with embarrassment, explaining, "My daughter is a bit conservative, that's why she doesn't sew these kinds of clothes." After the women left, Fatima's mother said to her, "Daughter, why do you turn away a chance to earn? Why don't you want to sew those clothes? We could have used the extra money." Fatima replied, "Mother, I cannot sew such immodest clothes for anyone." Saying this, she adjusted her headscarf and went to perform ablution. Her mother fell silent, knowing this was how Fatima always responded. Fatima's mother loved her dearly. The mother worked in people's homes, and the daughter worked hard at home. This way, Fatima had gathered all the dowry items for her wedding. Then, Fatima's mother found a good boy for her and arranged her marriage. The boy was poor, but he respected Fatima a lot. During the marriage talks, Fatima's mother had said, "I have no other support besides my daughter, so I will keep her and her husband in my own house." They agreed, and Fatima and her husband started living with her mother. Even though her husband worked, it was still difficult to make ends meet, so Fatima had to continue sewing clothes. As time went on, Fatima became pregnant. It became difficult for her to sew, and to make matters worse, her husband came home with the news that he had been fired from his job. Fatima was heartbroken and cried, "What will happen to me now? Will I have to sew clothes even in this condition? Can't I find peace?" Despite the hardships, Fatima's husband took great care of her. He would make tea and cook food for her while she sewed. He also continued to look for work. However, disagreements often arose between them over work. Fatima became rude and started using harsh words with her husband. When he sat down to eat, she would say, "All talk and no work, you just eat up our food." He would eat a couple of bites and leave, even though he was trying his best to find work. It was just God's will that he couldn't find a job. Finally, the day came when Fatima gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. Fatima's husband and mother were overjoyed. Her husband was so happy he went around the neighborhood distributing sweets. Coincidentally, as soon as he heard the good news, he also found a new job. The new contractor was very strict and rude to his workers. People only worked for him out of desperation, and he often swore at them. Meanwhile, Fatima's household expenses were barely being met. When her daughter got a little older, Fatima started sewing again to cover her daughter's expenses. The women who came for their clothes would often give her the leftover fabric, which she would use to sew little frocks for her daughter. This is how they got by, as her husband's income was only enough to cover the electricity bills and groceries. Then one day, disaster struck. Fatima was walking down the stairs when she suddenly slipped and fell from the very first step to the last. Her head was bleeding profusely. Her mother screamed for help, and the entire neighborhood gathered at their house. Her husband was immediately informed. It was a Friday, and he was working to earn extra money to buy toys for his daughter. No other workers were there that day. Upon hearing the news about his wife, he quickly locked everything up, put the keys in his pocket, and rushed home. Fatima passed away on the way to the hospital. Her husband was overcome with grief, remembering her words. Both he and Fatima's mother cried inconsolably. He was particularly heartbroken thinking about his innocent baby girl who was still an infant and needed her mother's milk. Everyone was saddened by Fatima's sudden death. No one could believe such a pious and good-natured young woman had left so quietly. Everyone praised her goodness and devotion. Fatima's mother and husband were distraught with grief. Then came the time for her burial. Fatima's body was taken to the graveyard and buried. When her husband was lowering her into the grave, the keys to his workplace slipped out of his pocket and fell inside without him noticing. The house felt empty. Fatima's sewing machine stood there, and her mother would break down crying every time she saw it, grieving the loss of her daughter and worrying about her little granddaughter who was now motherless. Fatima's husband comforted his mother-in-law, holding his baby girl in his lap, but a mother's heart could not be consoled. Her daughter, who had been her source of strength, was gone so suddenly. Fatima's mother couldn't believe it. She kept saying, "Just a moment ago, my daughter was sewing clothes. What happened?" Fatima's little daughter was also crying. Her husband didn't want to go to work for the next 3 days. He wanted to take care of his daughter and mourn his wife. He decided to call his boss and tell him he wouldn't be coming to work for a few days. As he reached into his pocket to get his phone, he realized the keys weren't there. He was puzzled. After much thought, he remembered putting them in his pocket. Fatima's mother, seeing his worried face, asked, "Furkan, what's wrong?" Furkan told her, "Mother, the keys I had in my pocket are gone. I don't know if they fell at the mosque or the graveyard." It then struck him that they might have fallen into the grave when he was inside. This thought worried him immensely. His contractor was a very harsh man. He would not forgive him for losing the keys. He valued his work more than a human life. Just as he was thinking this, the contractor called and said, "I need to set up the workers tomorrow morning, so bring me the keys tonight, right now, so I can set everything up early in the morning." Furkan's throat went dry. He couldn't bring himself to say he had lost the keys. He just said, "I will bring the keys to you in the morning." Now, he had to find the keys that very night. After much deliberation, he decided to go to the graveyard. It was midnight, and Fatima's daughter was asleep with her grandmother. Furkan started walking towards the graveyard. His heart was pounding with fear. He had never been to the graveyard so late at night. The graveyard was a bit far from the village. He didn't know what to do, but he had no choice. Those were valuable keys, lost due to his carelessness. He reached the grave where he had buried his wife just that evening and started digging from the side of her feet. His only goal was to retrieve the keys. He had barely dug a little when the gravedigger arrived and angrily asked, "What are you doing? Are you a shroud thief?" Furkan shone the flashlight on his face, and the gravedigger recognized him. "You are the man whose wife was buried this evening, aren't you?" Furkan, trembling, replied, "Yes, I came to bury my wife this evening, but my precious keys fell from my pocket into the grave. They are very important to me. I would be very grateful if you could help me." Hearing this, the gravedigger started helping him. They dug up a good portion of the grave very quickly. With the gravedigger's help, Furkan's fear subsided, and he felt a ray of hope. A little while later, the grave was completely open. When Furkan looked inside, what he saw shocked him to the core. The gravedigger quickly started shoveling the dirt back into the grave, sweating profusely. He said, "What kind of woman was your wife that she's being punished like this in her grave?" Furkan couldn't believe his eyes. Was this really happening to his wife? Fatima was so good and pious. Everyone praised her piety. She had never committed a sin that would lead to this. He was in agony. What sin did my wife commit to receive such a severe punishment? The gravedigger said, "You should find another way to get the keys. It's very difficult to find them in the grave." and you saw for yourself that her punishment is not ending. She is in a terrible state. Ask for her forgiveness, and if she committed any sin in her life, find out what it was so she can be forgiven." Furkan returned home crying. His mother-in-law saw him and asked, "Where were you so late at night? I was so worried about you." Furkan sat at her feet and said, "Mother, I have lost all peace. I am still shaking." His mother-in-law, scared, asked, "Son, tell me what happened. Where were you?" Furkan said he had gone to the graveyard to find the keys, but what he saw there would not let him live in peace for the rest of his life. His mother-in-law also got scared and said, "Stop speaking in riddles, Furkan. Tell me what happened." Furkan, weeping, said, "When we dug up Fatima's grave to find the keys, the sight inside was shocking. Mother, a pious woman like Fatima was being severely punished. I cannot even describe it. Fire was burning on Fatima's lips, and she was screaming terribly. I tried to extinguish the fire, but her lips were pitch black and swollen, as if they were hanging. The rest of her body was unharmed. The fire would go out for a moment and then flare up again. At first I didn't understand that it was God's punishment, but the gravedigger told me it was divine punishment, and it was only affecting her lips." Weeping, Furkan said, "Mother, I don't understand why there was fire on her lips. She always used to praise God with those lips and never spoke ill of anyone. She was such a good woman." Fatima's mother and husband cried all night, praying to God for Fatima's forgiveness. At the time of the dawn prayer, Fatima's mother said, "Go quietly and tell everything to the imam of the mosque and find out what is happening to my daughter. Did she make a mistake? The imam is a very pious and knowledgeable man. He will surely help us." Furkan agreed that the imam was the only one who could solve this problem. After the prayer, he stopped the imam and told him everything in private. The imam listened and said, "I want to meet Fatima's mother." Furkan took the imam home and introduced him to Fatima's mother. The imam asked her, "Mother, did Fatima ever backbite or commit any other sin with her mouth?" Fatima's mother replied, "No, my daughter only did her sewing work. She didn't have time to go around the neighborhood or invite her friends over." The imam then asked a question that startled Fatima's mother. He asked, "Did Fatima ever keep something that belonged to someone else, like leftover fabric or lace from a garment?" Fatima's mother said, "Fatima would return all the leftover fabric and thread. If she needed any fabric, she would ask for it first." The imam said, "Think carefully. Such a small mistake could be the reason for this punishment. She must have committed some sin with her mouth, knowingly or unknowingly." Then the imam said, "Mother, think of any habit your daughter had that was related to her mouth." After much thought, Fatima's mother said, "There was one habit of hers that used to annoy me a lot. Instead of using scissors, she would bite off the thread with her mouth, and the tiny leftover pieces of thread would sometimes get stuck in her lips or mouth. She would repeatedly do this instead of picking up the scissors. I would often tell her this was a bad habit, but she wouldn't change." Hearing this, the imam said, "Then it is possible that the punishment is because of that tiny piece of thread. Because before Fatima died, she was sewing clothes and was going upstairs. Maybe a tiny piece of thread was in her mouth at the time of her death, and it's because of that thread that she is being punished. A tiny piece of thread, like any leftover material, is considered the property of the person who paid for the clothes. Like all leftover items, the thread must also be returned. It would be best for you to pray for her forgiveness and talk to all the people for whom Fatima used to sew clothes. Tell them about her habit and ask for their forgiveness for her." Fatima's mother was very distressed. She never thought such a small thing could lead to such a severe punishment for Fatima. She gathered all the women for whom Fatima used to sew and told them about this small habit and asked for their forgiveness for Fatima. It was not a big deal for them, so they all immediately forgave her. For some, it wasn't even considered a sin. But sometimes what seems like a small mistake in our eyes can be a great sin in the eyes of God. Knowing Fatima's good nature, they all forgave her and left. That same night, Fatima's mother told her son-in-law, "Furkan, go back to the grave for the keys and see if the punishment has been lifted." Fatima's mother wanted to know if this small piece of thread was the real reason for the punishment. That night, Furkan went back to the gravedigger, and they both dug up the grave again. They saw that Fatima's body was perfectly fine. A beautiful fragrance emanated from her, and there was no sign of punishment. Firkin's keys were also in the grave. He took the keys, covered the grave, and came home to tell his mother-in-law what had happened. They both thanked God that the divine punishment on their daughter had been lifted. If you liked this story, please like this video. Now I bid you farewell and will meet you in another such video.